an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire Shadow Book 2 of Darkness and Dawn, chapters 10, 11, and 12. In these chapters, Shera finally loses the battle against her blade. It takes over, gets the best of her in this moment that genuinely, I thought her finally sort of giving in might be sort of exciting, but the whole time I was like, no, oh no. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to George for commissioning this episode. What's up, George? So this section is, I don't want to say it's slower than the others because this fight is pretty intense, but it feels a little bit less upsetting, I guess, is really what's going on, because we had like several kind of deeply fucked up things going on in the last section, and this time the fight just feels at least somewhat more straightforward, and there's no like innocent children or total bystanders or people who just happen to live in the wrong island getting roped into some shit. Everybody who gets involved in the conflict in this is fully prepared to be involved in a conflict, and they are trained. So in that respect, there was something reassuring about it, and I just kind of felt like, okay, a regular fight. This I can deal with. And obviously, that is not to say that I don't enjoy the stakes that are being created in other sections of the book. But I do need a break sometimes from the, like, relentless sense of unease and, what's the word I want? I want to say unsureness, and that is not the word. Uncertainty, I guess. Because it just, like I said in the last one, it feels like anybody could get gripped up by one of these elder, like, at least by some, like, leftover elder magic. It doesn't even really have to be the direct influence of an elder the way that I imagined it would. So this just seems like, well, if you're going to be taken by surprise, another human being is kind of like the best that you're going to hope for in this world. So this episode, or this chapter 10, starts out with present day. Shera and Ayana are watching a capital mansion. This is a reminder that the last section ended with them finding out that the Magisters are the ones that have the kids. So they have gone over to watch the capital mansion. It says it looked more like a number of townhouses stacked on top of and next to one another, until it resembled nothing so much as a small town all bunched together. But it was certainly a mansion. A pair of tiger statues waited by the entrance, amidst carefully pruned and tended shrubbery on either side. Gargoyles waited on the highest eaves, and guards patrolled the grounds every half hour. And eventually, there are some kids that are playing, and their hoop rolls a little bit too near the property, and these tiger statues, like, turn to observe them. It's unclear to me whether or not because the kids wind up leaving their hoop and just calling it a day. However, I'm curious whether, because Shera's assumption here is that these statues have been brought to life. That they are like sort of they have their own invested functionality, I guess. But I'm wondering if that's actually true, or if they're being used as a means of, like a security camera, like as a means of observing. Also, would those statues be able to tell the difference between an actual threat and a kid coming to get their toy? That's the kind of thing that, we have, there's been a sort of threat of robot police, and that's always the question, is like, how do they know what's actually something that needs to be dealt with potentially violence versus what doesn't, when actual human police seem already extremely bad at being able to tell that. So I'm very curious, like, if the kids had decided, no, we want our fucking hoop, what would have happened to them? Would they have been hurt? And just how often would something like that happen? Because this seems like they are sort of out. It just seems like the kind of thing that would come up more often than just the once, probably. Kids in the neighborhood would begin to figure out that is a place that you just don't want to play near. So first there were magisters coming and going at all hours. That might be expected, considering the mansion was owned by the head of the Magisters Guild, but it was still disturbing to look across the street and see men and women carrying tall, strange staves. Everyone in the Empire knew what a staff like that meant, and no one wanted to cross the Magisters. They could do things with intent that normal readers couldn't dream of, and Shera had to respect the danger. And this I found really interesting because I'm sure the Magisters have been mentioned. I just haven't really kept track of everything. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, this was never brought up before. But the fact that she keeps on, it's put in the previous chapter, Shera just assumed that readers could do pretty much everything. It begins to feel a lot more understandable why she takes that sort of attitude. Based on the way things work here, I've sort of given up trying to quantify abilities to a degree, because there's just, the goalposts keep moving. And I don't inherently have a problem with that. However, I do want to mention, Miles and I just finished one of it's the second Mistborn series that has Wax and Wayne in it. And we just finished Bands of Mourning. And we both had a really similar criticism of Brando Sando's approach to some things. And that was that he goes a little bit too far in expanding and expanding and expanding a universe to the point where half the rules that were set up initially are now being broken. And it kind of feels like no other rules are really going to be upheld either, so you stop knowing what the limits are, and that makes it feel almost not like there are no stakes, but it makes everything feel unmoored, and you need some rules that have to be obeyed in your universe for things to stay grounded enough that there's a sense of danger. Because otherwise, if you can just pull anything out of your ass and be like, oh, well, yeah, they can do that now. I know that I said that was explicitly something you couldn't do, but I said that so that it would be more impressive when they finally did do it. That can work, but when you keep doing it, it starts to be kind of like Doctor Who, where anything that seems to be a problem, in the back of my mind, all I was like every episode was just, well, they're obviously going to find the exact tool to undo this thing. They're obviously going to find the exact weapon to fight this particular threat. It always just wound up being totally possible to fight a foe that was otherwise allegedly impossible to fight. So I just want to put it out there as a caution. I'm putting a yellow triangle with an exclamation point in the middle, that if we have the whole thing with readers of different abilities, and we're adding the Magisters in now, I already felt like I didn't really understand the readers. And the Magisters being of another complete, it's not even the same plane we're talking about. They're in a different universe, it sounds like. If that's the case, I'm going to feel kind of lost when we begin to see those powers manifest in a material way. What Will is doing, I think, is smart, because he jumps in and out of different POVs. So, we go into the POV of a Magister, and we're going to get a more firm idea of what they can do and can't do in a situation, which helps. But all the readers are different. So I can't take the word of one reader's abilities as the rule for anybody but them specifically. And so I just wanted to put it out there that, like, my understanding of a lot of this feels precarious already. So when we're going to begin really mixing it up, I reserve the right to be confused later and need help, like, parsing what's happening. I'm just, I want to let you guys know where I am with this, because it's something that I've been hyper aware of because of the Mistborn coverage lately. And when I start to stray towards it, now I get a little bit more like danger signals around it. So anyway, the whole, like, this moment of all of them, like, watching these guys, she is noticing that the tigers are awakened, and she's getting more and more drawn to killing the Magisters and taking all of their power. She eventually had to unbuckle her shears and slide them across the roof and out of her own reach, much to Ayana's silent shock. The thoughts didn't go away, but they retreated to a manageable level. I was kind of fascinated by this. The fact that Ayana is shocked is the part that I find really interesting. I would like to know the origin of the shock specifically. Is it that Shera was never somebody that Ayana thought was going to need distance from her weapons to maintain control? Did she think Shera would be more than a match for an awakened object, and so it's simply like Shera herself that has surprised her? Is it that the power of the weapon is surprising her, that she didn't realize how intense it was, and now that she's seeing Shera having to put it aside, she's like, oh damn, I didn't realize it was like that though? Or is it simply a consultant thing? Like, you put your weapon out of your own reach. That's insane. We literally never do that. How can you be doing that? She doesn't say anything to her. So I'm assuming that isn't it, because she would have, like, kind of asked, well, what's going on? And she seems fully aware of the reasoning behind it. But it still might be playing a part, as far as it must be really, really bad if you, a consultant, are willing to be unarmed for the moment. When the tigers are awakened, Ayana, like, reacts. It says, her breathing grew quicker, bladed fingers tightening on the edge of the roof. It grew worse when a pigeon tried to land on the head of a gargoyle, and the statue reached up and swatted the bird aside. Then the world shook like the skin of a drum, and a hairline crack appeared in the sky. What's going on? I don't like it. It almost looked harmless. A thin pen scratch in the blue of the horizon, shaped like a jagged lightning bolt. Shera might have overlooked it, except it was a crack in the sky, which is italicized, which is pretty fun. The Magisters reacted immediately, scurrying out of their mansion and running around the grounds like Imperial guards faced with an unexpected attack. At that point, Shera broke stealth and whispered to Ayana, "We need help." Instead of chastising her, Ayana nodded. So yeah, you know that shit is about to pop off. So she sends a message to the Luminians, and Darius shows up. And again, I had really enjoyed Darius in previous chapters, and I'm pretty excited that he's being directly involved in things the way he is, because he winds up being sort of key to calming Shera eventually, and it's in a way that makes her think of Lucan. And I was interested, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'm ahead of myself, as usual. He climbed up the rope with impressive athletic coordination, ducking behind a defunct industrial chimney to look them each in the eye. Well, she assumed that's where he was looking, from behind his permanent mask of darkness. And he is just like, okay, so, crack in the sky. Funny story. We have no idea what the fuck this is. we think it has to be elders because there's nothing that makes sense. And elders are pretty much the only ones that can just decide to not follow the laws of the universe. So probably it's them. And I love that Shera says, we're not worried about the sky. She does not represent both of us in that statement, Ayana whispered. And she says, it's not our job to worry about that. It's my job, Darius pointed out. Yes, and I'll leave you to it. This is I like the pairing of the two of them. Darius has such personality in a way that Shera doesn't, and is so much more empathetic in a way that Shera has to actively try to turn on, and it doesn't always work. He's like that whole thing of her talking about how he reminds her of Lucan. It makes a lot of sense to me. And he's also undergone a kind of trauma that, as far as I know, Lucan hasn't, which is informing everything as well. And that adds a dimension that I think is kind of interesting. So she says, I'm concerned their security is too tight, especially now that the Magisters are agitated. And they had just been sort of like deciding whether or not they actually had to go into the building. They didn't think it was going to be a requirement, but at this point she's like, I think we're going to have to. Your faith in my abilities is flattering. Let me delay my investigation of a potentially world-ending crisis, and I'll check out this house for you. Shera patted him on the shoulder. Don't take too long. The world might be coming to an end. It's very nice. I really enjoy their interactions. So he says, the house is unreadable. I've never even heard of this being possible. But it's scrambled. I was just trying to get a general sense, and I felt everything, from the utter desolation after a battle to a happy home full of children. Nothing accurate. Do you need to get closer? Wouldn't help. To get any sort of read on that house, I'd have to be close enough to rub my nose on the door, in a manner of speaking. So I found that really interesting, the idea of being able to scramble intention. And it would be cool if that was something a person could do. You know, I mean, considering granted, this is happening in the present, and everything with killing the Emperor is in the past, but because the Emperor, there's like a danger of him being able to read that they are planning to take him down and outsmarting them before they're able to do their job, it would be kind of nice if there were a way to scramble your own intentions in this way. And I just think that maybe there's like some sort of invested object that could do it for you, perhaps. Look, I have a particular sensitivity to the concept of mind reading and or like motivation reading. And to me, one of my biggest priorities in a world like this would be to find a way to keep my thoughts, my own thoughts. The objects being invested because I'm reusing them, and that's fine. Fine. You can't help certain things. But my own, like, from moment to moment intentions, that's different. I really would want a protection against that. So, they bag this guy, and they're asking him who he is and what he's doing. And it is almost immediately a difficulty for Shera, who wants to try and kill this guy again. And she is just having her whole mind dip into thinking as Siphon thinks. And she doesn't even notice it's happened until it sort of fades for a moment. It's really getting scary, and she is getting disturbed by it in a way that I really appreciate. I really love Shera's overall personality of self-awareness and ruthlessness. It's a really interesting combination. Oftentimes, ruthlessness is paired with a personality type that seems to not really see the reality of what they're doing. There's almost like a delusional aspect a lot of the time, or simply a sense of not caring for other people. And with Shera, while we know she's fine with murder, like that's not a problem for her at all. It isn't that she's power hungry. There's nothing there's not a particular goal for her. It's simply just like, yeah, I killed him. They told me to kill him. It's fine. What? There's a deadness there. And yet, she will still stop and ask herself questions about why she feels urges to do things the way that she does them. Or, this blade influencing her. There would be people who wouldn't fight this. There would be people who would just be like, sweet, this blade is super powerful. It is made for me. And I am going to go out there and wreak absolute havoc. And the fact that she has no problem killing people, and yet she is like, I'm not just going to kill everybody to this knife. It's just a kind of fun experiment to see where she draws the line. And as we see here, it's very tentative. She keeps talking about how the bindings are not as effective anymore as they need to be, that they need invested again. And I just really kind of wonder if there's going to be a reveal that the wrappings are not going to do the job, that she needs to figure out another way to do it. I don't know. Everybody's talking about how newly awakened people, or new soul-bound people who have an awakened item that they're bound to, are really unstable in the first few weeks or even couple months of their connection. And I am wondering if it's just the item itself is able to exert more influence during that time, if it's that your will and resistance to it gets built up because of your practice resisting, or if there is a genuine sort of cool down after 3 months. Is there more power in an item initially when it's first awakened, and then the power begins to either, you could say, fade away, or simply become less chaotic and more orderly? But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of questions I have about this, and I'm fascinated to watch this happen. So they are asking this dude who he is, and the first thing that he says is that he isn't going to fucking tell them anything, and that it was a mistake for them to get him. And it is a really fun moment, because Shera is just like, oh, God damn it. Anytime somebody just goes right into threatening you when they are at the disadvantage, it means that they are not going to be fucking helpful. They're not going to tell us anything. So it's also fun too that she read this guy, and she's trying to figure out whether or not she knows him. And it says he could have been the smallest runt under Maxwell's care. Ultimately, she came up with nothing. Either I've never seen him before, or he's changed that much since he was a child, or I just don't remember. And we find out later that he does know who she is. And apparently, he isn't the only one. And Shera is surprised at the fact that people remember her, and expresses a sort of did I just make that big an impression on them, or what? And it causes her to sort of think about her thing inside, about how connections can be difficult for her. But I have to assume Shera makes a much bigger impression than she thinks she does, because of what she's like. And that, nothing in particular needed to happen necessarily for her to have been memorable, because she apparently looks different and has a completely different energy to her than most people. However, she also is the one who actually killed Max. So if for nothing else, they would remember her as that one, So she grabs her knives, and Ayana says something to her about, I can't believe you left those behind. You know better than that. And Shera says, I've been through some changes since then. Ayana gave her an odd look, almost concerned, but ultimately nodded. Almost concerned? Just be concerned. It's fine. Go ahead and do the whole concern. Don't do part of it. So she puts the blade of Siphon against his throat and is like, you're going to tell us, or I'll suck your life out, and it will not cause me to lose an instant of sleep. And he tells her, they call me Akko, and then when he mentions Maxwell, he calls him our father. And she realizes that he knows who she is. How many of you are there? 30, maybe? You shouldn't have taken me. And where are the others, Akko? You shouldn't have taken me, he repeated, leaning back in his chair and closing his eyes. He began making a visible effort to control his breathing. And then he just says, his eyes opened, unfocused, and he stared at the ceiling. They are all around us. In the shadows, figures in black stepped out, knives in their hands. Shera stared blankly. There's no way. That's not possible. She would never have missed that many people before, much less with her soulbound powers. With Siphon on her waist, she should have felt them coming a block away. Then a few more silhouettes stepped into the dim light, and the mystery was solved. They were carrying staves. So, yeah. This is kind of what I'm talking about in terms of like moving the goalposts or finding things out. And again, it's not an inherently bad thing, but it is something that I notice and I just want to mention it. So the fact that she has this like soul-bound item, and as far as we have sort of known up to now, being soul-bound is like the highest level of power that a human being can achieve, is becoming soulbound to an object. And that is like, you've leveled up to the top, you're on a particular like course or track with whatever you choose to bind with, and that is sort of just, you work on how to become more powerful within that new framework you're operating in, but there's no real getting beyond that as far as we have known. And the Magisters are able to overpower this artifact that is like of the dead mother and wants nothing more than to drain people with a huge amount of power. And all these people with a huge amount of power are in the room, and her blade has no idea? Yeah, I don't care for this. This is a kind of power on their part that feels just a little bit out of proportion. So this guy steps out, and he's a Heartlander, and he has a mask on. Mackendy Maxius, and this is the one that George told me last episode. We had met before when we were in the other book series. But I don't think that he was like a particular important figure in that. It's just that we had seen him. So he says, I think we have something to discuss. And of course, throughout all of this, I just want to mention, Siphon is pulling at Shera. It's just a constant, like, in her ear. And Mackendy says, I know this is abrupt, but let me reiterate that I've had a very stressful day. We have known about you since the start. Your guild has the lion's share of information, but it doesn't have a monopoly on the market, as it were. Thousands of readers who work for me aren't blind. So Ayana tries to be like, hey, okay, sorry guys, we didn't know that he worked for you guys. Please take him. And Maxius says, I mean, you knew something. We heard you questioning him and what you were asking initially, and there is a not small contingent of people that really would want me to kill you. Shera tensed. It lined up with the news from the Luminian Order and with the actions of the Imperial Guards. The Imperialist guilds wanted to start a fight. By walking into this warehouse, Shera and Ayana had given them exactly what they wanted. And that's what makes everything so sad, is that if I had known this guy was trying to get Shera to fight, but Shera wasn't realizing that's what he was attempting to do, and she gave in to Siphon and started a fight, it would feel a lot more like, oh, poor Shera, she doesn't realize. But she does know. She's aware right away that this is what he wants, and she still can't stop herself. And to me, that's a lot more of a violation of the discipline that we have seen in her up to now. It's one thing to just resist a fight because it's overall not a good idea. It's another thing to resist a fight because there is a very specific and potentially like world-shifting outcome that could happen if you do get into this fight, and she knows that is the case. And yet, she still winds up losing it, and that's really dangerous. I mean, we know, but truly, I thought she was going to make it. I really thought when he tries to provoke her, she was going to initially lunge for him, and then she would recontrol herself. And that's not how it goes. Well, not until like a little bit later. So he mentions the gardeners, and he also says something about like whether or not they're architects. Just a bunch of, again, information about potentially how the guild works. And it's just not supposed to be common knowledge. So the fact that he's working with all of this is alarming. So Shera asks, why take us at all? And he says, you may have noticed, I have other dishes on my plate today, so to speak. When the sky cracks, one calls the Black Watch first, and the Magisters second. Also, I believe I told you it was my colleagues who want to aggressively pursue armed conflict with you. Whatever their policy, I don't actually want a battle yet. It was the first thing he'd said that Shera was sure was a lie. And she just says, assassinating regents is a bad way to start then. And Ayanna is so irritated because this is just showing their hand about what they know. It's not a good move. And Shera is like, yeah, but he probably knows that already. They set this trap for us. They have to be aware of some of the information that we're working with. So I really don't think that I have given anything of material value up. And let's see, as I said earlier, I'm not trying to goad you into attacking. I have a different goal in mind. And in the end, I think you'll find it's not so incompatible with your own. We want to see an empire united, after all. And certainly, we don't want it drawn and quartered. He's not provoking us. He's provoking the regents. It made sense from a certain point of view. If the regents attacked on their own, then they wouldn't be cooperating with the guilds. He would have a chance to take on his opponents one at a time, rather than together, and with the regents gone, the guild heads would be much more likely to compromise. Now, I was sort of interested in this, that he would have a chance to take on his opponents one at a time. So the regents never work together? I just kind of assumed that since they all share a title, that there was some sort of collaboration between them. Not necessarily that they work in tandem with each other or anything, because they clearly have like their own entire philosophy behind ruling. They have their different territories. But I think I just assumed that if they're all beginning to face the same sort of threat, they might be willing to just actually team up for a little bit to make sure that that is dealt with. So, he tosses a letter to Shera, and she's like reading it, trying to sense if there's anything like weird about it. She even thinks that it could have been a bomb and she shouldn't have caught it, which her level of paranoia is truly next level. It's smart because considering what's possible in this world, it makes sense to be worried about that, but still. And she thinks to herself about how he's just letting us walk away. I don't understand this. She wants to, and she doesn't understand why they're allowing it to happen. So she's looking around at the people around, like the people that used to be with Maxwell, and she's recognizing some of them, and she thinks she's even recalling some names. And she's wondering what happened in the intervening years. Inexplicably, the thought caused a flare of anger. How dare Maxius take them and use them like this? She'd spent her whole life thinking everyone had gotten out but her, and the idea had brought with it a certain satisfaction. If she'd known that Maxwell had never really died, that those he'd kidnapped and trained were still being used by someone else, what would she have done? And I thought that was interesting to see her feel very protective of all of these people in a way that she was not even really prepared for. I am hopeful that this is going to mean something, that she's going to be able to act on this feeling of sort of possessiveness, you know. Something else tugged at her emotions too, Cyphrin. It begged her not to leave, tugging at her anger, her sympathy, her greed, her exhaustion, her ambition. But Shera had one advantage. She was tired. She focused on her desire for sleep and set her highest ambition as her own bed. Maxius put a hand on her shoulder. Keep your intent under control, young woman. It's difficult not to feel threatened when a soulbound keeps thinking about murdering us all. He withdrew his hand a second before Cyphrin drew his life away, but that was the final push. In an instant, Shera's thoughts went icy cold. And again, I thought she, whips the blade out and she misses him, and I thought she would begin to chill. No. She begins to pull power out of him for real. And this green mist is rising out. And then when we go into chapter 11, we are in his head. So it starts out with an excerpt. In the simplest possible way, readers are above the law. A reader with enough skill and power can, given time, escape any shackles and evade any punishment save instant execution. Mortal judges are powerless to enforce their will on readers or soulbound with any degree of precision or impartiality, which is why the Guild of Magisters exist. I just, it's always who watches the watchers? That's always the question. We've got magisters. Cool. They're dealing with the readers and the soulbound. Okay, so who's watching them? I guess we'll find out. So, the situation may have looked dangerous from an outsider's perspective, but he was confident in his ability to handle the unexpected. The warehouse he'd purchased, packed with crates of legitimate goods, had provided the perfect cover. Now, as the soulbound somehow tore the life from one of his magisters and flipped out of sight, he was prepared. He hadn't quite told them the truth to begin with. He never expected them to walk away without a fight. He had their measure, and he knew that the only thing he had to do in order to provoke them into attacking was nothing. And he has been reading, of course, both of them to try and figure out what their deal is, and he senses the fact that Shera is newly soulbound and she is very unstable, and that she is the one to target if we want to get shit popped off. Even his pat on the soulbound's shoulder had been calculated to push her over the edge, to tempt her into using her power. The one miscalculation so far was her attack on his magister, which was a regret. The man would get the best medical treatment available once the consultants were dead. And I'm just yeah, once they're dead, sure. Yep, okay, buddy. As soon as the soulbound woman ducked behind the crates, he flared the flame on top of his staff. And he manages to fill the room with flame in order to kill the shadow so that there is nowhere to hide. A discrepancy in intent floated across the room. Fear had spiked for an instant and then gone quiet. Behind his mask, he scanned the room. He cast his mind to search for her, but in a flicker of shadow, she stood in front of him, looking even more like a picture out of an elder's nightmare. One glimpse was all he got before she knocked his staff aside, sending it skittering away. The world plunged into darkness. And then we get Maxius had dealt with some shit. He had gone through it. And he has enough in his nightmares already. But this is about to join them. It's up there. When a magister is plunged into darkness, they have one instinctive response: to search without their eyes, to rely on their sixth sense. Unfortunately, this meant they froze in place. 2 wisps of green light rose with a hiss like a death rattle swirling away in the darkness, lives stolen by the soulbound. So he's reacting, throwing light. He's got these little, balls that light up that he, rolls into the, Men and women shouted and pushed each other, their boots kicking, the lights this way and that. Blood stained the floor. In the shadows, flashes of green and the fall of bodies identified the soulbound. Waves of terror and clashing sparks pinpointed the daughter of the Imperial Guard. Blood sprayed across a nearby crate, and his heart sickened as he wondered how many magisters he'd led to their death that day. And really, he keeps thinking that, it's worth it. It's worth it. I mean, it sucks that they're dying, and for sure this is a loss, but what I had wanted is being accomplished. And then he really starts to realize, the proportions of this might not be what he was hoping for. It was, let's see, he thinks about the cultivation of the children and his, how easy it was because these kids were already super disciplined, so there wasn't as much to do as he was expecting. And he's, kind of thinking, low-key, these kids are almost as good as the gardeners. Key being almost. Less than a minute had passed, but his men were in a panic, and the enemy was disciplined and effective. So, this is when he begins to plunge his awareness into the wood of his staff. And it was forged in fire, right? So this is the whole thing. He could replace this warehouse and its contents more easily than his magisters. As callous as his business had made him, the lives of guild members always came first. He hadn't thought they would do this so fast. Battle anger came over him. He placed the end of his staff against a crate. A wash of his intent made it lighter, and he shoved it aside. This investment should never have worked instantly, but he was cutting corners. It would return to its original weight almost immediately and would be impossible to invest thereafter. But it was enough to expose the soulbound, her trembling green dagger held over the body of one of his black-clad assassins. And he realizes that she is trying to resist what it is doing. And I am assuming that this is somebody Shera knows. So that sucks. The staff pulled itself to one side, clipping her across the jaw. The impact sent her spinning. He gathered his fiery intent, and though he could hardly spare the attention for it, there was some kind of commotion near the doors. Most of them are fleeing. And then here come 3 men, Darius Albright and a couple of other dudes. He immediately thinks, oh, good, they're here. So then I'm going to burn all of them and I'll be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And he is very confident, very, very confident. So then we go to Shera again. And she has just been knocked down, so we, are coming to her right after she hits the ground pretty much. The life running through her could not be stopped just because she was about to die. The energy she'd stolen begged to be used, demanded to find an outlet, and she was hungry both to wield that power and to gather more. When the head of the magisters drew up his intent, his staff rippling up its length with flames, she felt both the heat and the weight of its power. And she is partially thinking, I didn't want to do this, but another part of her is like, well, that shit got started, so what are you going to do? Do you want to die? And no, she does not. The wisp of green between them begins to pull out of the actual, weapon itself. And she realizes that she stole the force of his intent. But instead of moving into her body, it stayed outside. It wouldn't obey her commands either. She couldn't absorb it directly. She couldn't absorb it or direct it to move. And she's watching it and thinking about how fascinated by this Lucan would be. And she lurched towards Maxius, bringing her dagger up when she felt something tear into the skin of her shoulder. And Ayana is there, jabbing her, saying the fight is over. And Shera is trying to be like, I know. But also, it's absolutely fucking not. I definitely have plenty more people in this room that I will kill. Darius comes over. And he is trying to say, hey, guy, you want to come outside? We don't want to fight. We're just here to have a little chat, but it's getting pretty steamy in here with this fire. And Moxius finally realizes the nature of Cyphrin. He asks why she's using a weapon of Nicothi, and Ayana says this is the blade that pierced her heart. And he just completely, like, there is a sense of, I knew I was going to be dealing with some shit, but this is completely on a level I was not expecting. So here's the thing. He turns to say something to somebody else, and she jumps at him with her knife out. He moved his hand as though to catch the end of the blade, powerful intent sweeping down to block the blow. He really, again, very confident. It works for a moment, and then it begins pulling, and the tip pierces his chest. A blinding, glorious river of emerald strength flowed down the vessel into her arm and spread through her body. Pain and physical exhaustion no longer concerned her. Even her thoughts seemed clearer than before. And she kneels and is like, I am going to take all of this. I can't believe I ever tried to resist it all. This is amazing. And of course, then begins to plan each other person in the room and their power that she's going to drain. She looks up to see Ayana is gone and is just like, that's fine. And I'm like, is about to be. She does not seem to see this as a potential problem. Darius, however, says, I have just watched you murder a guild head, and I am going to have to take you in, man. Shera is like, oh, cool. You want to fight? I mean, from the start, I have been wanting to fight you and take your power. So this is dope, and I will do it. She runs at him. He anticipated her. And they basically go back and forth for a moment. And he says, come with me. I will beg you if I have to. And she keeps fighting. Don't make me kill you, he said. His voice sounded like Lucan's. She couldn't figure out why. They didn't even sound alike, not really. And Lucan had never said those words to her. But there was something in the actions that accompanied the words, how he went to every extreme to avoid killing her, that shook her. What if Lucan was here with her? Would she have turned on him too? And she hurls the blade away from herself and sways and says, I'm a little tired, and collapses. Just, there's a lot happening, guys. And I said I like Darius from the start. I'm giving him like an extra star. That's bonus credit for him, because the entire way that he handles this feels compassionate. There is just a constant sense from him. He is so aware all the time of what people are dealing with. And I mean, if you're a reader, that has to be part of it. And it could go either way. You either become used to the fact that everybody's fighting their own battle and sort of turn that part off, or you allow that to inform every interaction in a different way. And I'm really liking the way that Darius is choosing to go with it. So then we go to chapter 12. And this is 8 years ago. She has had another meeting with Yala, and it says, in the 8 months since Silverreach, the Emperor had spent less and less time training them personally. He'd given them over to other gardeners, to members of the guilds, even to Jarlis Teach a handful of times. Jeralis. those lessons were less than helpful. They were essentially guides in how to avoid panicking when confronted with a vastly more powerful source, which I found really funny. I mean, I can understand that being something that you teach, but yes, in this case, that's not going to be super helpful. So they had grabbed her and are pumping her for information, and Shera is sort of suspicious of the fact that she thinks Yala is getting impatient enough that if this isn't done soon, and by this I obviously meant murder the Emperor, she may just take it and go do it herself. In the few times she'd seen Carrion over the past year, Shera had tried to gauge how the older gardener felt about the Emperor's secret assignment, but Carrion practically refused to address it. Carrion was on the Council of Architects, having retired from gardening years ago, and it was said she was on the path to High Counselor, but she hadn't made it yet. And Shera thinks about how she just never responds, and she'll change the subject if Shera brings it up. So she's walking away from this meeting, feeling irritable, and she can sense that Maya is there. And she thinks about just going, okay, who's there? And then she's like, I'm just going to fucking kill him. Fuck this person. I'm sick of this. And I really enjoy that. Just pure grumpiness. The triangle of steel flashed from her hand as she dove to one side, drawing her bronze-bladed shears and looking to confirm her target. Maya sat on the branch, blonde hair tied up behind her head, veil over her mouth, holding the weapon between two fingers. She had a particularly dissatisfied look on her face. I really love that. Sure, Shera was able to notice that she was there, so stealth is not necessarily her thing right now. But a bitch can catch this thing that's been thrown in midair. I mean, that's not nothing. And I really do like that Shera sort of, it feels like, very purposefully kind of grants her a compliment by being like, well, I didn't know that you were following me on the way out here. Once I left, I did, but not from the start. And Maya's like, oh, that's something. So Shera says, look, I can't tell you anything. You know how they are. You know that they've sworn to me. And then she's like, I'm kidding. I'm going to tell you absolutely everything. The Emperor is going to know it all. They're acting like we need to keep it a secret from him. What's the point? And Maya thinks they are going to want you to try to get him to change his mind on this whole plan. She thinks they care about the Empire so much that they would never want anything to disrupt it, much less his death. So they don't want you to kill him. And Shera's like, girl, no. They want me to kill him yesterday. They want this shit done. And Maya says, impossible. Mother is dedicated to the Empire. And she thinks of this line that Maxwell said, family is the root of all insanity. This is one of those things where, for me, family has never been a major part of my life. I had a very, very small, central core of family that I saw consistently. I have an extremely large extended family, but half of them don't even speak the same language as me. And I just never really was so this sort of thing, and people feeling obligations to family and believing in family members, as if they aren't just regular people who are fallible, it's not something that I really understand, and I never have. Even from a child, I was perfectly aware that my parents were not, perfect people, However, I have seen it manifested in other people, and it is, honestly, I really agree that it's the root of all insanity. There is a sense of complete disconnect from reality with some people that I know to be otherwise extremely rational people. But they will set so much of the evidence in front of them aside in order to continue to think what they have thought. And it's fascinating because we all sort of can do this with people that we think we know, and we will overlook evidence that they are maybe not the same person anymore because we just don't really necessarily interact with them enough for that evidence to be super meaningful. It will just be like, well, of course, the passage of time, somebody might grow and change. But our views of some of them don't necessarily update. And when we get together with family, I think a lot of you probably have gone through this as well. Your family will continue to treat you like you're the same age they were when they last saw you. Like, you know, however many years ago, or the last time that you had like a big party together, or there was a big event, you know. And I remember I was like living by myself, and there was just I had a whole life. And I was talking to my mother, and she said something like super inaccurate about the way that I lived. And I can't even remember really what it was. I think that she said something about how I was such a slob. And I have since grown to realize that I'm absolutely not. It was just, you know, it was a phase in my life, as so many teenagers have. But she still saw me that way. And it was a weird moment to realize, like, man, after you move out, your parents still, their file doesn't really update, you know? But anyway, so all of this to say that Maya, as I had mentioned last episode, is a rule follower and somebody who respects authority figures and thinks the best of them, believes that they know all the information that needs to be known, that they are going to make the more honorable choice because she believes that they genuinely care about like the greater good and that they aren't doing things based on profit. But yeah, Shera says, I don't know how she feels about the Empire, but she thinks the Emperor's death will be the best thing for the Guild. And Maya says, oh, so you told her that that's not possible, right? And Shera's like, I mean, I never thought that it was possible for us to fucking kill him in the first place when he told us that's what he wanted. I was kind of like, I mean, I'd love to, but can I? And she says, I really think to accomplish that, we would at least all need to be soulbound. And again, Maya says, well, if that were true, he would have made sure we were soulbound. It's just her perfect faith in later on, when Shera is saying, you saw how he was at Silverreach. Maya says, he told us he was in perfect control of himself. Like, she's just, you know? And Shera is like, girl, that's the thing. If he's out of his mind, we can't take his word on things. Like, come on. And she says that's disrespectful. Honestly, that cracked me up. Just like, don't talk about him that way. We're going to talk about how we may have to, like, fucking kill the man. But don't badmouth him. I don't know, guys. This just cracked me up. Genuinely, like, it feels very true, too, about how certain people are and the, like, places that they draw lines. I mean, I will take a man's life, but I will be damned if I stand here and listen to this. So anyway, she starts to get extremely agitated here and says something like, because Shera says we really should remove him sooner rather than later. And the longer we wait, the more possible that we won't get much warning when he goes. We aren't ready. And I think that taking him a little bit sooner than he expects might be one of the only ways we pull this off. And Maya's like, he said 20 years, at least give him the time that he has asked for. And Shera says, well, what happens if the dead mother takes over and we just didn't notice? He could just kill us, and now we've got Nakothi's puppet on the throne and nobody would know. The High Council would know. Oh, girl. So, now that I think about it, you broke the Emperor's confidence. He told you what he'd do to us if we told his secret. What he'd do to all of us, not just you. And she starts to get a look in her eye. And Shera has to sort of keep her cool because she knows what Maya is struggling with. But also, it's very possible this girl's going to lose control and she will have to actually be prepared to defend herself. And she says they have figured this out a long time ago. You know that they did, or else this moment right now wouldn't be the first time you mention, oh, you broke his confidence. You know that that's not even come on. And Maya starts to get more irritated just for a moment before finally getting control of herself and just says, I'm sorry. It just gets the better of me sometimes. I just really appreciate, again, all of their self-awareness. It feels like that's something that you really would probably need to get this far as a gardener. So she's walking with Maya behind her, continually thinking about how she wants to grab her weapon. And all of a sudden, Maya says, okay, look, I didn't want to do this, but I need you to promise me that if it's time to take him out, you will actually have a conversation with me and Lucan first. And she says, don't try something by yourself no matter what my mother says. This is something that I found really important. All she has been doing is worshiping authority figures. And then for this particular thing, she's like, yeah, but fuck them for now. Talk to us. And to me, that says that she is worried for Shera. You know, that she cares about Shera enough that she will flout the rules for her in particular. And maybe it's more about the Emperor than it is Shera, but I don't know. I'd like to think that it's about Shera, but maybe it's just about the gravity of killing the Emperor and overall implications of that. Probably that's more likely to be it, I guess. I want to think that she cares though. And so Shera has to take a moment and be like, why would she think I would do something without asking? And then she thinks back about all of the moments that she genuinely almost did take action without coordinating with them, without warning them about anything, without having an aside and them all deciding together. She's just like, I just am totally prepared to do this by myself, actually, because I need to be ruthless. That's specifically what he asked for. And they may not be up to it. And she had said, she thinks to herself she was only opening up to Maya because she had been caught. An uncomfortable twisting in her gut told her she was on to something. This was one of those things that didn't work inside her, at least not quite the same way it worked in everyone else. The idea scared her. Until someone else pointed it out, she couldn't see what was wrong with her. She was blind. It reminded her of the Emperor. He could tell the madness was coming, but he wasn't sure she would recognize it when it arrived. And she finally says, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to consult with you guys. Sometimes that's not worth the risk. And all of a sudden, Lucan says, that's exactly why you need us. And it turns out that he has been following. And he's been following Maya, who did not notice. And the fact that he is here makes it sound to me like him and Maya probably discussed this before and decided that they both needed to approach her because they were worried that Shera was on her way to do something drastic, and they are both not as ruthless. I don't know. It's interesting to me that the Emperor chose Shera probably because he knew that she would not hesitate the way these two are, seem to be planning on, honestly. But I do also want them there, judging at least to a point, you know? So I love, before I kill anyone, I'm learning a lot from this. I should wait for you two to follow me, and then you'll pop out and give me a different perspective. That's not at all what I meant. It was a joke, Maya. Oh. The conversation died out after that, but Shera thought she understood the message. Just keep the other two informed before taking action. Easy enough. In the darkness, the three gardeners walked home together. And that's the end of the chapter. So, I hope that it is all three of them. I feel like the impression that I got from Shera's thoughts in the previous book, whenever she would think in the direction of the moment she had to kill the Emperor, that all three of them were working together. So I think that works out. But yeah, I'm excited to find out where this goes. I don't know if we're ever actually, like, I had waited in the first book for us to get told about the specific moment she takes the Emperor out. It doesn't happen. In this book, it feels like we're getting closer to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if we don't really find out details until the third book. So I'm trying not to get my hopes up too much that specific info is in this one, because, you know, I don't want to be excited and then wind up reaching the end of the book and being like, but, you know, I mean, I will be like that, but it would be my own fault versus just sort of wanting. All right, guys, thank you again so much for listening, and thank you to George for commissioning the episode. Appreciate you very much. Really enjoying the series. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.